Adinam. Synonyms: Matribhakti, as respectful as one is to his mother. Parastrishu, to other women. Patnyam, to his own wife. Ardhaha, half. Eva, like. Atmanaha, of his body. Prajasu, unto the citizens. Pitravat, like a father. Snigdaha, affectionate. Kinkaraha, servant. Brahmavadinam, of the devotees who preach the glories of the Lord. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: the king will respect all women as if they were his own mother, and he will treat his own wife as the other half of his body. He will be just like an affectionate father to his citizens, and he will treat himself as the most obedient servant of the devotees who always preach the glories of the Lord. Purport: a learned man treats all women except his wife as his mother, looks on others' property as garbage in the street, and treats others as he would treat his own self. These are the symptoms of a learned person as described by Chanakya Pandit. This should be the standard for education. Education does not mean having academic degrees only. One should execute what he has learned in his personal life. These learned characteristics were verily manifest in the life of King Prithu. Although he was the king, he treated himself as a servant of the Lord's devotees. According to Vedic etiquette, if a devotee came to a king's palace, the king would immediately offer his own seat to him. The word Brahmavadinam is very significant. Brahmavadi refers to the devotees of the Lord. Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are different terms for the Supreme Brahman, and the Supreme Brahman is Lord Krishna. This is accepted in Bhagavad Gita 10:12 by Arjuna, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma. Thus the word Brahmavadinam refers to the devotees of the Lord. The state should always serve the devotees of the Lord, and the ideal state should conduct itself according to the instructions of the devotee. Because King Prithu followed this principle, he is highly praised. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So I first beg the blessings of the assembled Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis that I may speak properly on our Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta, the philosophical conclusions given to us by our Gaudiya Vaishnava teachers. And I pray to say something of value so that we can meditate deeply on morality and what real education is. It's very important point that Srila Prabhupada points out, that this should be the standard for education. What is the standard for education? That a learned man treats all women except his wife as his mother, looks on all properties, others' property as garbage in the street, and treats others as he would treat his own self. So in the verse, it talks about how King Prithu will treat his own wife as the other half of his body. And so in Vedic understanding, and most people's understanding, I would say, that when a man and woman come together in marriage, they actually become one person, the half and half. And the wife is always known as the better half, right? We always use that term, the better half. The wife is always the better half. And so to treat his own wife as the other half of his body, and to see all other women except his wife as his mother. So we can look at this verse in purport and see how this is education, this is morality. And morality comes from God. Dharmam tu sakshad, right? Yamaraj in the sixth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam talks about how religious principles, dharma, morality, education, all of this comes from Krishna. All of this comes from God. Even the great sages and rishis who are very learned in the Vedas, they sometimes cannot really ascertain what is dharma, what is morality. Even the Vidyadharas, those who live in the higher dimensions sometimes cannot understand what is real morality. Mahajano yena gata sapanta. Yamaraj then lists the Mahajans, the great personalities, who, because of their dedication to the holy name of Krishna, actually all dharma, all morality is revealed in their heart, and then they reveal it to others. And we see how in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna states that he specifically comes to put dharma and morality back into people's lives. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhutanam dharmasya tadatmanam surjamiham. Whenever and wherever there's a decline in morality, Krishna or his avatars, his incarnations, come to put things back into order. So sometimes it can be seen that in this world, the living entities on Mother Earth are very oftentimes immoral, irreligious, and they make a mess of things. And so just as a parent has to go into the child's room and sees a huge mess and has to make order of the chaos of toys and clothes. So just like a loving parent, Krishna comes to reestablish Dharma, put all the toys back into place, and make some type of order so that people can live happily. So then we can even look at these statements and think, well, why should I follow morality? Why should I treat all women except his wife as his mother? I mean, why should I? What's the benefit of that? Any real deep thinker would ask that. And so it's to live on a human platform, right? This is the difference between humans and animals. In human life, there's order. We see the animals are just going about by instinct. Right? They're being driven by their passions. So when we look at morality, it creates order, right? We don't want barbarianism, right? This is like the, you kind of like funny cartoons where you see like cavemen dragging women by the hair and treating them, objectifying them. But this is actually against Vedic principles to objectify women. We see how Draupadi, she's objectified. She is the wife of the Pandavas. She's one of the most chaste ladies, and she's treated like an object. What happens? There's a huge battle that kills millions of people because she's offended. She's treated like an object. And so in Vedic principles, women are always to be protected, taken care of. Their chastity is preserved. And this is very powerful on metaphysical, subtle levels, as well as gross levels, so that there's not Varna Sankara, unwanted progeny that are disturbed, not taken care of, right? And you get a population that's completely confused as to what it means to be a human and what human life is about. Looks on others' property as garbage in the street, meaning that if you see another person's property, you don't point out that, oh, look at that garbage, but you see it as not being yours. You're not going to take it. You're not going to take it because it's not your property. And you want to treat others as you would treat your own self. This is the golden rule. And it's interesting how we can talk about how morality comes from God, but most of these principles, I would say most thinking people, most people that are a little bit conscious, all pretty much agree on. It's something that's kind of eternally there within us. Now, this might not always be the case. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, great acharya, but also one of the greatest philosophers of all time, he breaks down human life, right? So he talks about consciousness, right? To be a human being, we're conscious. We're conscious of the material objects around us. We're conscious of ourselves. We're conscious of others. But then there's different levels of consciousness. And so he talks about how there's 5 different humans, you could say. So the lowest kind of human would be the immoral atheist. And this is, we can read about this immoral atheist in chapter 16 of Bhagavad Gita, where they talk about how this world is unreal. There's no plan to this world. It's just chaos, lust, greed, envy. These are the main goals of life. I've collected so much wealth today, so much wealth I'm going to get tomorrow. I'm going to crush my enemies, and there's nothing that's going to stop me. This is the, evil-minded person. So this is the immoral atheist. And when we, think about immoral atheists, some of them might also just be kind of ignorant of principles, ignorant in the sense that they don't know any better. We look at Murugari the hunter, who he was half killing animals, right? But he didn't know any better. When Narada Muni, the great sage, comes to Murugari and says, hey, you're doing this evil activity. You need to think about your consequences. There's going to be repercussions for your actions. Then Murugari, he's, what? I've received this bow and arrow from my father. He's taught me. I'm just doing what he was doing. I didn't know there was right or wrong. So the immoral atheist, Murugari just didn't know. But then there's others who, and we see this in today's culture, that there's a rampant nihilism. And this is what is very much destroying culture and values, is that when you have immoral atheists, then they destroy culture and tradition. Nothing matters. There's no reactions to your actions. It's all about money. And, even sometimes it's not about the material objects. It's just about, who cares about the world? I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and then I'm going to die, and then there's nothing there. So the lowest human, according to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, is the immoral atheist. But it's interesting how, so he talks about how the lower species, he uses the term chaitana, which means consciousness. And so there's different levels of consciousness where you have plants, they have a certain consciousness, then you move up and there's animal consciousness, and then you move up to finally human life. So immoral atheists, and then you have above that a moral atheist. And so this is an interesting point when nowadays there's a lot of debate and discussion over morality. Where does morality come from? We've established it comes from God. But then there's atheists that would say, well, I can be a moral atheist. But then when you look at what their morality is, it still lines up with God's morality. And so they're higher than immoral atheists because indirectly they're kind of following order, structure of God's plan to keep everything going so that people could be happy. I mean, now there's a big push for many atheists, they're becoming vegetarian. And this is one of their main talking points now is veganism and vegetarianism, because why do you want to hurt other human beings with slaughterhouses, factory farms? This is and they point out that this is actually immoral, and then try to use that as a way to attack people who are religious and are kind of bought into the slaughterhouse system. That if you're also claiming to be moral, well, then you should follow vegetarianism. Side point there. So you have the moral atheist, who then is higher because he's indirectly following God's order. Then we come to the speculative moral theist, is how Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur puts it. So moral, religious person, but they might not know properly what is actually, they're kind of speculating on morality. So they might have a certain kind of leaning towards God, but then they might have a speculative morality about them. They're not really learned in the real details of morality, but they're trying and they'll get there. And then finally we have the you could say the Brahmins and sadhana bhaktas who are learned in scripture and shastra. And so when we even talk about this point of following dharma in Hari Bhakti Vilas, there's a quote from the Vivishvatara Purana where it talks about how achara prabhavo dharma, that religious principles are born from the codes of proper conduct. So proper conduct, when we look at what Srila Prabhupada is saying is here as education, this is just the standard of being a human, right? So it's like, this is what basically should be the standard for education, but this is just to be like a normal human being. And when you're really following religious principles, which are born from the codes of proper conduct, saintly persons are always inclined to follow the codes of proper conduct. Sadhunam cha yata vritam. So this is why their behavior and activities are known as sadachar, because they're always following the proper conduct and religious principles. So their activity in life is called sadachar. And I just had a thought and it just vanished. Oh man. Oh, so then going back to how we spoke about Draupadi, if when you have proper sadachar, when you have proper conduct, then you're not going to make offenses to people. You're not going to even incur bad karma. Right? And so by not incurring bad karma, not making offenses, yesham tvanta gata papam, jananam punyakarmanam, by performing these, you're not performing any sin, you're freeing yourself from sin, you're not going to fall into any offenses, then you're going to be able to properly follow your heart to follow God and fall in love with God. And so this is why it's most important to just even understand proper conduct. You could be a philosopher. You could know so much knowledge. And yet, if you don't even understand what the standard for education is, education does not mean having academic degrees only. This is time and time again shown in the Vedas and Srimad Bhagavatam, that look at Durvasa Muni. He was such a great and powerful yogi, but yet his mentality towards Maharaj Ambarish, he wanted to kill the king. So it's actually stated in those verses that a learned person, somebody who has knowledge, but then they're not gentle in their behavior, it's like a jewel on the hood of a snake that's going to strike you, right? What's the value of that jewel on the hood of a snake? So if we don't have proper conduct, but we feel like we're so learned, then we're going to make offenses. And so this is why in our own society, we see how when one wants to have the Bhakti Shastri education, go through the Bhakti Shastri, there's actually a course first on Vaishnav etiquette. Right? What is proper etiquette? How can I live my life so that I'm not making offenses and I know what is the basic proper etiquette? Otherwise, what's the point of learning Shastra? What's the point of becoming a learned person when you're not gentle? So then somebody might challenge us saying, well, you're talking about morality. Morality comes from Krishna. And yet your God Krishna seems to be a very immoral person. Right? We hear about, Krishna is supposed to be truthful. He's supposed to be the absolute truth. He's supposed to be so truthful, but yet we see how he's lying to Mother Yashoda when he's accused of eating dirt by Balaram and the cowherd boys. Krishna, Balaram, and the cowherd boys, they're playing, and the cowherd boys go to Mother Yashoda, headed by Balaram, and say, Krishna's eaten dirt. Mother Yashoda, feeling parental affection for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who's her son, she demands that, I want to see the inside of your mouth. And Krishna states that they're lying. I did not eat dirt. And well, the fact is that he's being truthful. He didn't eat dirt. Right? Tushta Krishna Prabhu was talking about Chintamani, the philosopher's stone, right? The jewel that if you have this jewel, it actually manifests your own reality. Chinta, which means your reality, money, the jewel. So it's the jewel that manifests your reality. Whatever you want, whatever you think of, it will be manifest by this jewel. Chinta mani prakarasadma sukalpa vriksha lakshmi sahasra satasambhramasevymanam. Brahma's description of Goloka Vrindavan is that each grain of sand, each dust particle is chintamani. It's a wish-fulfilling jewel. So Krishna, he didn't eat dirt. He was eating chintamani jewels. Right? When we hear about how Krishna, he steals butter and yogurt and curd from the gopis. Right? This is a daily affair. He's stealing from the gopis, and the elderly gopis, they're making fresh butter every day out of the milk that's coming from these wish-fulfilling cows, kamadhenus, right? The topmost cows that are producing the topmost milk, and the gopis are making the topmost butter. Who wouldn't want that? And so Krishna, he and Balaram, they would go into the houses and steal butter and yogurt, right? The gopis, they would actually daily go to Mother Yashoda and complain to Mother Yashoda, do you know what your sons are doing? They are going into our houses and they're stealing all the butter and yogurt. And if they fill up with butter and yogurt, what do? They start feeding the monkeys, right? And sometimes, you know what we do? We try to put the pots of yogurt high up. And what do? They take sticks and they poke holes into the clay pottery, and all the butter and ghee come out, and they take all of that. We can even see their footprints in the yogurt. And when we go to Krishna and we say, Krishna, you are a thief, he says, no, you are a thief. And sometimes we hide the butter and yogurt in dark places where we think they can't see, but their jewels on their bodies, actually, it's not the jewels, their bodies create this halo, this effulgence, which enables them to see the butter and yogurt. And sometimes what do? If there's no yogurt and butter, they pinch the babies, and the babies start crying. And they make a mess of the house. And Mother Yashoda was listening to this, and she didn't want to chastise her son. But actually, Mother Yashoda, sometimes she would say, okay, I'll keep them home today. They'll be punished. And then the gopis, right, they would say, oh, actually, don't punish them. Don't punish them. Look at that beautiful face of Krishna. Because this was their Sankirtan. This is the gossip of the gopis talking about Krishna and Balaram. This is beautiful Sankirtan and remembrance of Krishna's pastimes. And so they're actually relishing these pastimes by telling Mother Yashoda this. But so one can say, well, Krishna's stealing all these things and just see how immoral he is. But everything is an emanation from Krishna. Ham sarvasya prabhavo mata sarvam pravartate. All material and spiritual worlds are emanating from the absolute truth. So everything is technically him. Vasudeva sarvam iti. When one really becomes learned, then they see Vasudeva sarvam iti. Everything is actually Krishna and Krishna's energies. So why can't the supreme absolute truth steal his own energy? But we should also understand that Krishna is not being immoral, but the residents of Vrindavan, they're ragatmika. They're the very essence of themselves is pure love of God. And so this butter, yogurt, ghee, all of these things, they're not material. Like when we use ghee and butter, when we have ghee and butter in our kitchen, these objects are the very manifestation of their love of God. And so that's why Krishna is so eager to have it. We hear how Mother Yashoda and the Gopis, when they're churning, right? When they're churning the butter and yogurt, they're singing songs of Krishna. Their bangles are making sweet sounds that produce heavenly music that they're singing to. And what to speak of entering into the 10th canto, this is why the first 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam talk about morality, talk about dharma, right? And this is why even some people, they worship Ram, because Lord Ramachandra, he's also the incarnation of God, but yet he's completely moral, whereas Krishna is seemingly immoral. And so to understand the pastimes of Krishna, one has to have very deep insight into spiritual life and not try to drag down the so-called immoral activities of Krishna into our lives. So as above, so below, Bhagavad Gita talks about how the material and spiritual world are like a tree, right? The tree in this world, and when we go next to a lake or a pond and we see the tree, there's a tree in the reflection, and the top of the tree in this material world is the top of the tree in the spiritual world on the other end. So that which is seemingly most abominable and immoral in this world might seem to create higher rasas or mellows that are relishable in the spiritual world, because there is no material. Not to get too far out there, but Rumi, there's a poem that says that there's a field beyond right doing and wrong doing. There's a field, I'll meet you there. So there's no right and wrong in the spiritual world, because to even get into the spiritual world, you have to live the most moral life. So there's no seemingly material morality there. And so in this world, in the material world, in this time, our so-called morality and education, standard for education, right, which means treat all women except one's wife as his mother, look on others' property as garbage in the street, and treat others as he would treat his own self. We see that our morality and our values are constantly under attack, and especially in this culture. We talked previously, about nihilism, or even just how people do not hold the same morality. I mean, if we've all experienced this in our own lives somehow or other, that our moralities and our values are under attack by others. And sometimes it's very difficult to uphold our own values, because it's easier just to go with the flow of what everybody else is doing. And, it's hard to be a free thinker when you're just taking in information and you're just kind of going with the flow, and this is what it is. But then to be a real deep thinker, it's, you're going to have values that are challenged. And I wanted to end by, I was very I was very inspired by the story of Desmond Doss. I don't know if many of you know about this personality named Desmond Doss, but there was a movie made called Hacksaw Ridge that talked about his life. And so Desmond Doss, he was a conscientious conscientious objector. So he joined up for World War II. And, his father had been in the military, his brother went into the military, and he just felt like, I need to go to the military. I need to fight in this war. I mean, he said, I need to join the army and go and help, do what I can. But he was the conscientious objector, meaning that when he was going through boot camp, he wasn't going to pick up a gun. He wanted to go as a medic personnel. And so as a medic personnel, you still have to know how to use a gun, fire a gun, and he completely refused. He said, I'm not going to fight. He was a Seventh-day Adventist. And so he was a vegetarian, which was pretty far out for the time of World War II. His mother raised him as a vegetarian, raised him to understand that killing another person is the most heinous crime in God's eyes. And so now he's going to World War II, and he's going to have to fight the Japanese. And they wanted to imprison, the US military wanted to imprison him and keep him from going to the war because he wouldn't pick up a gun. And he was placed in jail. There's this whole trial that they had where he was just sticking to his beliefs. He just felt so strongly that I'm not going to pick up a gun. I'm not going to kill anybody. And they were trying to, like other people were saying, well, I'm a Christian and, this is war. It's okay to kill another person. You're not murdering them. But he was just so convinced that I'm not going to pick up a gun. This is wrong in God's eyes. And so they actually allowed him to become a medical officer. And he was very strict also that, every Saturday, it was the Sabbath. And so he would just have that day for prayer. And so he went to Okinawa, and they had this area that they had to take from the Japanese where they had to climb up this ridge. There's this place where you had to climb up and then go. And the Japanese, they were underground, and I forget what it was called, but the group that he was in, they were just massacred. They went up there and they tried their best, but they had to retreat and they had to climb down. But Desmond Doss stayed at night unarmed. He was going on the battlefield, and he would listen for his other his army friends. If they were crying out, he would go over and he would grab them. Some of them couldn't walk, their leg was blown off or they were shot. And so he would take them, carry them to the ridge, and then he would lower them down. And there were people that were told to wait to see if anybody else was coming down, because they just thought all these men were dead. So night after night, day after day, he was just continuously lowering men down. He was like running from Japanese soldiers, and he was even actually saving some of the Japanese soldiers and lowering them down to get medical attention. He ended up saving 75 men. And he was just praying to God over and over, let me get one more, let me get one more. And he was going through the battlefield. He was getting shot at. He never returned fire, never held a gun. And he even got injured. He just kept going, but he got injured by trying to kick a grenade away from his men, and it hurt his leg. But he was the first conscientious objector to receive the highest medal of honor. And he was completely convinced of what morality is, of what it means to be a moral person. I'm not going to kill another person. I'm not going to take another person's life. And he was able to save 75 men. And, they thought he was a coward. They thought, oh, you're hiding behind your beliefs. But he just felt so strongly inside. He was, even though the culture and everything was against him, still he upheld his own beliefs. And so I was like, man, this is really, really inspiring as a devotee to hear how somebody like this, most people might not know his name, but it's still an amazing story to really reflect upon when we're faced with following certain beliefs and understanding really what is dharma and what is expected of us in the eyes of God. And of course, so this is the beginning of human life, and to not just become moral, but to really understand why morality is there. And it's to lead us to ultimately loving God, because also you could be the most moral person, but then love of God might not flourish in your heart. And so this is why Srila Prabhupada ends with talking about how King Prithu, right? He's the incarnation, Shaktivesh avatar sent to, bring back morality from the reign of King Vena, put everything back in order. And so he's also going to serve the devotees. Brahma Vadinam. He's a servant of the devotees, because the devotees are the highest moralists. They're completely understanding of what is dharma. And this is stated by, again, Yamaraj, talking about how even the great rishis who occupy the topmost planets cannot ascertain the real religious principles, but those who are Mahajans. And he talks about the Mahajans, Lord Brahma, Narada, Shiva, Kumars, Lord Kapila, Manu, Prahlad, Janak, Bhishma, Bali, Shukadev, and Yamaraj himself. They know real religious principles. My dear servants, this transcendental religious principle, which is known as Bhagavat Dharma, surrender unto the Supreme Lord and love for him, is uncontaminated by the material modes of nature. It is very confidential and difficult for ordinary human beings to understand it. But if by chance one fortunately understands it, he is immediately liberated, and thus he returns back home, back to Godhead. But all this morality, the Mahajans are who they are because they have complete dedication to the chanting of the holy names. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This is what makes them Mahajans. That's the whole point of why even Yamaraj is speaking because he knows the power of the holy name. And so Brahmavadinam, the state should serve the devotees, and the ideal state should conduct itself according to the instructions of the devotee, so that everybody can be the most happy and peaceful in human life. So I'll stop here if there's any comments, questions, or reflections on any of these points that were brought up.
Hare Krishna and Bala Gopal. Please accept my humble obeisances, like Gloria Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Prabhupada. Better half.
I have a, if it's okay, I have a question for my sister. So she's basically wanting to know if we're seeing so many people with a lot of immorality happening on like a grand scale. Like, why, I guess there's a dissatisfaction of thinking, oh, well, karma will catch up to them in another life. It's gonna fix everything, like true, we're trying to live moral lives ourselves, and then seeing such an injustice basically on a grand scale, and just being like okay with it. Like, how do we maneuver without feeling like we're just getting swallowed by it all? Thank you.
Reflecting on that question, I feel that I guess the first thing that comes to mind is to be the change that you want to see in the world. That, there, when we're living and going through the whole human experience, and we're seeing other people do things that we know are not right, there's so much injustice, and why is it going on? Why are they getting away with it? But then this is why it's so important to understand the real Dharma, religious principles from the Mahajans, is because look at Prahlad Maharaj. His father wanted to kill him. His father was destroying Brahminical culture, was destroying culture, was destroying morality. His father started to kill cows, cut down trees, do all this horrendous activities. And Prahlad Maharaj, he was such a innocent, pure devotee that when his father was killed by Nrsingadev, by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prahlad Maharaj prayed for him. Prahlad didn't want to see material justice and say, oh, I want my father to be punished and go to. He sincerely prayed for his father, to Lord Nrsingadev, that his father would receive the highest benefit of surrendering unto Krishna. So for us who, we can, I guess that's also another aspect of this purport, is that when it says the state should always serve the devotees of the Lord, we think, oh, I'm a devotee, the state should serve me. I should be in charge of this kingdom. I should be in charge of the government, and everything will be run right. But we have to not get on a high horse and look down upon others and judge them, because we are not the judges. We are the servants of God. And so we follow morality. We want to be the change that we want to see in the world. And then we have compassion and we have mercy and we pray and we're tolerant, but at the same time, we try to wake people up. So, and that's always a balance in life, is that, how are we going to, judge? And this goes back to rising up to the Madhyama platform, the platform of a real devotee, understanding that you love God, make friends with those who are like-minded and have deep trust and understanding. You are merciful to those who are ignorant, those who don't know. You want to be merciful to them. And then apeksha, you have those who there's going to be fights and discords and misunderstanding. Then you try not to bring up, you try not to wake them up. You try to be friendly with them, nice with them, and that way you're also trying to create a peaceful situation. So we always have to remember that aspect of mercy and compassion, that there are reactions there, and we don't want to see anybody suffer. And that's also why we have to understand we're not the body, we're spirit souls. Other personalities are spirit souls, but they're covered. And so we don't hate the sinner, but we hate the sin. And so we try to help them and open their eyes. I hope that's okay if anybody else would want to chime in and help me. or if that's okay, if that's an acceptable answer.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. Obeisances. Thanks for a nice class, Prabhu. So you're talking about the wife being the better half, and in light of the situation with Draupadi and the situation in the world today where it's not like anyone wants to be the better half, they want to be completely equal. One time Prabhupada was talking to a reporter and saying that mostly the social problems were due to the people not seeing their position, like the woman, being submissive to her position as a wife and a family member and mother, and the husband being submissive to Krishna's instructions to be responsible for the family. So anyway, so how do devotees, or how do you understand this adage or whatever, that the wife is the better half in terms of Krishna consciousness and devotional service?
Yeah. Well, I guess from my perspective and thinking about it deeply, there's statements in Shastra about the wife being submissive and things like that, but my Guru Maharaj, he actually said it best, that the wife is like the Chana avatar, the hidden incarnation, right? So anybody who's married and has a successful marriage knows that the wife runs the show. And the husband might seem like, yeah, man of the house, and this male ego can flare up and be like, yeah, I'm the man of the house and I run things. But every sane husband, every sane man understands that the wife really controls and runs everything. But the wife doesn't necessarily control it by force, right? And anybody who's in a relationship knows that your partner can just give you that look where you're like, oh God, what did I do? What did I say? I messed up. And then your male ego is crushed. So it's the wife is the better half. And I was listening to Prabhupada recently where he talks about how women give men energy. This is why they're called Stree. They actually give the husband energy. I mean, even when you look at like a household, if you look at most bachelor pads, it's like very bare, unorganized. The wife's touch comes and makes everything organized, makes everything happen. And in Krishna consciousness, this is why Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj gave the instructions to the newly married devotees that the husband should serve the wife, see her as not as an object, which when we hear certain statements from Shastra, we can misuse those Shastric statements as a way to objectify even our wife. But we're coming together with Krishna in the center. And this is why marriage in spiritual life is so powerful, because you have a common goal to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. and not use each other as objects, right? The wife can also see the husband as an object, as a way of security, as a way of, so many ways a woman also objectifies men. And so it's not meant to objectify each other or come together, but it's to be part of a revolution of serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then you're not objectifying each other. So to know each other's roles means to be the servant of each other. The wife serves the husband serves the wife, and to see each other as one body. I mean, this is actually stated in Shastra. This is why the whole tying of the dhoti and the sari, the exchanging garland, the whole ceremony itself is dedicating and coming together to serve Krishna. So I hope that is a proper answer. I don't know if you have anything to add, or if anybody else has anything else to add about that.
Thanks so much, Prabhu. That's so nice. I was just thinking on a kind of a real, Gaudiya level of seeing how, Prabhupada would say that the girls are like Gopis and or the wives are like Lakshmi. You call her Devi, right? So she's representing Lakshmi, who's the expansion of Radharani. And of course, Radharani, Krishna will, in his special times, will always say that she's the better half. So in that way, in this world, we have this expression, but the real understanding comes, like you're saying, through the devotees putting Krishna in the center and seeing how much, how wonderful is this service to Srimati Radharani. So thanks so much for the Hare Krishna.
Any other last questions, comments before ending? All right, thank you for your kind attention. Please forgive me if I said anything wrong or made a mistake. If I said anything proper, it's by the mercy of Shishi Guru and Gauranga. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna.
Well, thanks for covering class today, Bala. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.